Well, welcome to Module 1, The Nature of Science. Okay, so we're going to study the actual process of science in this module. What science is, what it isn't. Okay. A lot of times people have this idea that scientists are like the Doc Brown stereotype from the Back to the Future series. This kind of crazy mad scientist guy in his basement. And really nothing could be further from the truth. Science is very much a social, very much a collaborative process. The experiment I worked on at the CDF facility, at CDF experiment at Fermilab, we had over 3,000 scientists working together. We worked with the Department of Energy and I think something like 30 different countries, scientists from 30 different countries. And we all worked together and we argued and tried to publish papers and tried to knock each other's theories down, and in the end, you know, it was a better product for it. All right. If you really want to see the kind of collaborative approach that science takes, do a search for the Decadal Review for Astronomy and Astrophysics. That's something that people generally have an easy time understanding. You know, they know what black holes are, they know what planets are. So when the science community gets together, the astronomy and astrophysics community gets together, and they say, hey, look, the really big questions that we need to concentrate on are, in this particular field, are the following things, like, is it possible for life to exist on other planets? Okay, and that's one that just doesn't make, because we don't have the tools to really answer that question yet. But very often we'll have identified steps getting toward that, because that's kind of an important question, you know, in the big picture of things. You know, can life exist elsewhere? And so in that particular field, the tools to create the tools would certainly be a high priority. Right? So another thing to keep in mind is that science is a human process. We all have biases. We take a look at the science that was done 100 years ago, and we kind of cringe and go, oh my goodness, how could they have done that? And it's like, well, they were all white European men. Okay, well, have to take that into account. And, you know, people 100 years from now are going to say, oh my goodness, they were all Homo sapiens or something like that. Yeah, I'm not really quite sure. But we have human biases. We try to do our best to get past them. Neil Tyson deGrasse, he's a great science educator. He defines science as whatever it is we need to do to keep from fooling ourselves. Okay. We all have our pet theories. We all have the things we're rooting for. And if I write a paper rooting for my pet theory, I'm going to publish that, though. And that's not science. It's not science until it goes past peer review. And people who are not as invested in my pet theory are going to take it apart. They're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. These are going to be people with their own pet theories. And it says, aha, your pet theory doesn't, or your take on the standard theory doesn't account for this factor or that factor. And during that peer review process, I have to answer those questions. And it's a very stressful, very long, drawn-out process, but the science is better for it. There is a bedrock of agreed-upon science science facts that we have, and we can argue around the edges and things like that, and hopefully we may even advance the science a little bit, add to that scientific consensus. But in the end, it's still a bunch of human beings arguing with each other. And that means that the body of knowledge that we call science is always subject to revision. It's not like revealed knowledge or something of that sort. New evidence will call into question old knowledge. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Facts and theories and opinions. Okay, a fact is an observation. Facts are potentially accessible to anyone willing to do the experiment, anyone willing to look through a telescope, anyone willing to look through a microscope for years upon years, okay, to make the same kind of observations. Those are facts. You can't argue with those. You're not allowed to have your own facts. You're allowed to have your own opinion. This microbe is prettier than that microbe. Okay, but that's not really science. We don't really build science off of people's opinions. We build it off of facts and observations. And that comes down to the old saying that you're allowed to have your own opinions, but not your own facts. All right? Cherry picking, that would be another example of people trying to choose their own facts. Okay. We can make all kinds of observations. For instance, ancient peoples may have noticed that there was a correlation between certain astronomical events and the coming of the seasons. Like, for instance, the Egyptians would see the first time that Sirius, the star Sirius, rose above the horizon, and they would know that right about that time that the flooding of the Nile would occur. Now, did the rising of that star above the horizon cause the flooding of the canal? We now know that that's not true. We just know that that they're both related to how the Earth orbits around the sun. Okay, and the seasons are related to that, and so the position of Sirius in the sky is also related to that. So there's a third variable, which is the orbit of the Earth around the sun. Okay. Correlations can be very useful. The ancient Egyptians used to use the heliacal rising of the star Sirius in order to predict the rising to the flooding of the Nile. That was very valuable to them. Okay, but it isn't causal and it isn't science. All right. What happens when we take a look at two variables that we see a correlation? We can do experiments. In medicine, it would be called a randomized clinical trial, and that would utilize whatever experimental procedures we need in order to keep from fooling ourselves. Okay. If you used a control group, for instance, we use one group that gets the medicine, one group that doesn't get the medicine. The control group might get a placebo, a sugar pill. You might not tell the control group that they're getting a sugar pill. Well, I mean, you obviously wouldn't tell the control group they're getting the sugar pill. But on the other hand, you might not tell the researchers either. You might make sure that the actual medicine and the sugar pill look exactly the same, and the only record of who's getting what is in a sealed envelope someplace that isn't going to be reopened until later. I experienced a little something like that in high energy physics. I took a lot of data, and I had to look at phenomena that were related to the phenomena I wanted to look at, do the analysis on it, but I wasn't actually able to look at the data from exactly what I was interested in, the mass range, the energy range, the number of collisions, that sort of thing like that. That was all masked and hidden from me. Okay, and then when my collaborators saw that I had a handle on the related data, that my tools, the tools that I had written, would give the expected answers for the related data, then we would go back and say, okay, let's do the unmasking. I would take a look at the actual experimental data, and then we came to a conclusion. Okay, and in case you're interested, no, I didn't find the exotic particle, and no, I didn't think so, because if it was a promising area of study, they wouldn't have given it to a grad student. Okay, so okay, we're also going to talk about science reporting. Okay, we have scientists who are very good technical experts. Often that comes with a deficit in communication. Communicating science news is a very different skill than actually performing research. And we have some examples of some very talented science communicators. Carl Sagan is a famous science communicator. I remember that there was a big discussion of why wasn't he a member of the American Academy of Sciences. And that's because that while he had the credentials to be a scientist, he was not an active researcher. Okay, he was not doing science, he was communicating science, and he was doing it very, very well. And I wouldn't be a scientist today if he hadn't. Him and Leonard Nimoy is Spock on Star Trek. Okay, the two of them set me on the road where I am. If you want some very interesting science communicators and scientists now, I would look at Astronomy Cast. It's a podcast. One of the gentlemen is Fraser Cain. He's a science writer. He's a computer programmer. He runs the Universe Today. It's a science reporting website, space science reporting website. And Pamela Gray, she's a faculty member at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, and she is actively involved in astronomical research and science education. So there's a kind of an overlap there. All right, and so it's interesting to hear them talk about a particular topic. So if you're interested in astronomy, definitely look up Science Astronomy Cast. Let's talk about the Science Toolkit. That's one of your assignments during this week, and modules 1, 2, and 3. You're going to be using the Science Toolkit. It's a scaffold. It's a worksheet to step you through the process of asking the kinds of questions we're going to want you to ask about any piece of scientific literature that you come across. It's a worksheet. Your Turnitin score is going to be high. I expect that. I'm not unreasonable. About a 50%. I'll look at it to see, where the match is. Okay, it shouldn't be in your answers. But the questions themselves, and let's face it, if you do the citations right, you're going to be that's going to match everybody else who used the same source, and so those Turnitin scores are going to be up there. What I'm looking for in the Science Toolkit is not only for you to take a position to answer the question, but then to support your position, to support it with evidence from the readings or other sources. One of the questions is this particular publication or article or authors, do they show evidence of bias? Well, what's the right answer? What shows up as me to bias may not show up as to you as bias. But then I'm asking you to support your answer, whether you said yes or you said no. I want you to support the answer. And it's a general rule of thumb. If your answer isn't at least as long as the question, you need to provide more support. Okay? That's not a hard and fast rule. It's not a hard and fast rule. I've had people provide very succinct responses. But in general, that's only been, I've been teaching this course for a couple of years, and I've only had 2 occasions where I've said, well, yeah, okay, they did okay. They did okay with a 3-sentence answer. Good luck to you. Okay, we're going to, hopefully by the end of this, you're going to be a skilled consumer of scientific information. Good luck to you. Okay?